I'm going to turn it over to Andrea and Amber. Welcome, ladies. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you for having us. So welcome everyone this morning to an overview of the Connecticut Paid Leave Act. We're glad to be here. I am Andrea Barton Reeves. I'm the CEO of the Connecticut Paid Leave Authority, and with me today is my executive assistant, Amber Forrest. That is an inadequate description of all that she does, but I'm glad that she is my partner in all of this. So Amber, I know, just has a few housekeeping matters that she'd like to announce. She's just gone away.
Yes,
And
good morning,
she's
everyone.
back.
Thanks so
There you
much for
go.
joining us.
Okay.
All right, so we'd like to ask that you utilize the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of your screen, to submit your questions. In the meantime, I'll be dropping links to some of the things that we'll be talking about so that you can check those out after the webinar. And we will get to your questions at the end of the presentation, and we will be providing the presentation to EANE so that they can distribute that to you. Thanks so much for having us.
Okay. Thank you, Amber. So I think everyone can see my screen. I will be off camera and I will also close the video link. So I won't be able to see you at all. But afterward, as Amber mentioned, I'll come back on and then we can have an opportunity for questions and answers. So let's go ahead and let me get that done and then we will get started. So my panel and I'm back. Hide the video controls. Okay, then we are ready to go. Oh, hang on. Here we go. Just one more minute. Can't seem to do all these things at the same time. All right, there we go. All right, so today we will talk about Connecticut paid leave and its implementation and things that you really need to know about the program. As I mentioned before, I'm Andrea Barton Reeves. I am the CEO of the Paid Leave Authority. Immediately prior to joining the Paid Leave Authority, I was the CEO at HARC, which is a large nonprofit that supports people with intellectual disabilities and their families. I've just generally been in the area. I'm from New Jersey. I've been in Connecticut for going on 23 years. And this is a role that I've had since March of this year. Today, we'll talk about the program itself. I'll share with you some key dates. We'll go over an overview of the law, how employees will apply for those benefits, and the role that the employer plays in administering the program. I'll have some examples for you as to how the program actually works, some additional resources, and then we can go into our questions and answers. The Paid Leave Authority was actually created by statute that was passed in July of 2019, signed by Governor Ned Lamont. Our primary purpose is to provide financial relief to Connecticut families by allowing them to care for their loved ones or themselves without having to worry about lost income while they do so. We have a twofold mission in providing pathways to accessible paid leave benefits and to empower employers and administrators and healthcare providers by offering them tools and support so that they can navigate the program and administer it appropriately. There are 5 major responsibilities at the Paid Leave Authority. One of them is outreach and engagement. So again, we appreciate the time to be here today. We develop the policies and the procedures that are needed to run the program. We also establish the contribution rate and we receive contributions. The contribution rate is 0.5%, and by statute, it can't exceed that, but we can lower it if there are enough resources to do so. We approve and audit private plans. Employers have the opportunity to offer their own alternative to the state plan under certain circumstances by statute. And finally, we are responsible for the claims administration for paid leave benefits. So who is covered by this act? Those that are covered include employers who have 1 or more people working in the state, and that includes not-for-profits and private sector employers that have unionized workforces. Those who are sole proprietors or self-employed, they can choose to opt in at any time, but if they do so, they have to remain in the program for 3 years. Those entities that are not covered include the federal government and the state of Connecticut, with exceptions that cover covered public employees. The same is true for municipalities and local or regional boards of education. They too are exempted unless they have covered public employees. The only category of employer that is completely exempted are non-public elementary or secondary schools. So what is a covered public employee? For the state of Connecticut, it is the managerial or non-unionized employees of the state of Connecticut. The unionized employees may also participate if they collectively bargain to do so and be involved in the program. With respect to municipalities and local and regional boards of education, if the unions in those entities vote to be included in the program, then all of the employees that work in the municipality and all of the employees that work in the local or regional board of education are then included whether they are in the union or not. And you can see that the definition of municipality is rather expansive, including what we traditionally think of as a town, a city, or a borough, but it also includes a tourism district or a flood commission. So these rules apply to those entities as well. Here's how the contributions of the 1/2 of 1% are managed. The employer collects those from the employee, representing 1/2 of 1% of wages. The employer remits those contributions along with corresponding wage information to the paid leave authority. The authority receives that information and validates it through a number of sources, including the Department of Revenue Services and the Department of Labor. The contributions are deposited into the Paid Leave Trust Fund, which is managed by the Office of the Treasurer. And those trust fund resources are used to administer the program and to pay paid leave benefits starting in 2022. Here are key dates that you should be aware of. Our website launched on September 4th, and it can be found at ctpaidleave.org. And it does have just an abundance of information that's available for employers, employees, third-party administrators, and healthcare providers, as well as sole proprietors and the self-employed. Registration for employers opens now. We're asking all employers to be registered by December 31st. We're trying to encourage as many as possible. The point of registration is to let us know that your withholding obligation with respect to your employees begins on January 1, 2021, as noted in this timeline, and benefits then start in January of 2022. So let's take some time to have a brief overview of the law itself. What are some of the reasons for leave under the law? Well, they include these: to create or expand your family through birth, adoption, or foster care, to care for a family member with a serious health condition, or to care for your own health condition, including serving as an organ or bone marrow donor, or pregnancy, for which there may be 2 additional weeks of leave available if there's incapacitation experienced during pregnancy. There's special leave available to care for a family member that has been injured on active duty, also known as military caregiver leave. There's also qualifying exigency leave that allows a family member to take time off to see off a family member that is being called to overseas active duty. And finally, what is unique to the law in Connecticut is up to 12 days of leave is available for those that are impacted by family violence. Here's a comparison of the law as it currently exists in the state and what it will look like in 2022. The current FMLA, as many of us know, applies to large employers, those with 75 employees or more. And in order for an employee to be eligible, they had to have worked at least 12 months for that employer and at least 1,000 hours in the 12 months preceding the time that they wish to take for family and medical leave. Job protection is available after 12 months, and once those criteria are met, then 16 weeks of leave is available in a 24-month period. In addition, the employer can require the employee to exhaust all of their accrued time off to cover the time they're away in the form of wage replacement. All of this changes significantly in 2022. The law now applies to employers with 1 or more employees as opposed to 75. The hours worked requirement is completely eliminated, and job protection becomes available after 3 months rather than 12. The time available to take leave is up to 12 weeks and a 12-month period for all of the leave reasons I noted earlier, including the additional 2 weeks for incapacitation during pregnancy. Another significant change is that the employer can still require the employee to use their accrued time off, but they must allow the employee to keep up to 2 weeks of their accrued leave. And I'll cover that in a bit more detail in just a bit. So here's an overview of the leave laws. There are a number of laws that provide job protected leave, and that will include the Connecticut Family and Medical Leave Act starting in 2022 with 3 months of time worked at the employer. Other laws, federal FMLA, workers' comp, the 80-day, the Pregnancy Disabilities Act, and the Fair Employment Practices Act remain in place. Income replacement will now be available under the paid leave law, and workers' compensation will remain an option as well. So the primary difference that we'd like to highlight between the federal law, when we try to run it concurrently with the new state law, will be the definition of family. We know that under the federal FMLA, an employee can take time to care for a parent or a spouse, a child who is under 18, or if they're over the age of 18, that child has to have a disability. The Connecticut law, come 2022, expands the definition of family considerably to include a parent, a spouse, a child of any age, and now it includes siblings, grandparents, grandchildren, or individuals to whom the employee is related by blood or affinity. So essentially, someone with whom they have a close association, that's the equivalent of a family relationship. So what does that really mean? So here's some more guidance around related by affinity. The actual definition that we're using at the Paid Leave Authority is that first sentence. Any person with whom the employee has a significant personal bond that is like a family relationship, regardless of biological or legal relationship. And that determination is very, very situational specific and governed by the circumstances of the people who are involved. But I'd like to draw your attention as an example, to, let's say, the second to the last bullet, where there is an unmarried significant other of the employee with whom the employee has a familial spouse-like relationship, despite the fact that they may not have a legal relationship to one another, so they're not in a civil union, but our state recognizes marriage. There is also, for example, a foster child in the same home in which the employee was a foster child for several years, and with whom the employee has maintained a sibling-like relationship. So there are circumstances under which this related by affinity will work. The Department of Labor is providing more guidance so that it can be easier for employers to determine what that really means. Let's go on to talk about what the length of the leave might be. The federal leave remains as it is, 12 weeks in a 12-month period, with the exceptions for the caregiver leave for military caregivers. The FMLA for Connecticut in the year after next is 12 weeks in a 12-month period. It also recognizes the 26 weeks in the 12-month period for military caregiver leave, 12 days for family violence leave, and an additional 2 weeks for incapacitation due to pregnancy. Those same time periods are also available for paid leave benefits, understanding that only 12 weeks of leave is available for paid leave for the military caregiver leave. Looking here, we can see what the eligibility requirements are as we compare one statute to another. Again, the federal leave requires 12 months of employment and an hours worked requirement of 1,250 hours in the 12 months immediately preceding the leave. The new law in Connecticut considerably shrinks that amount of time to 3 months of employment and no hours worked requirement. Access to paid leave benefits from the Paid Leave Authority is defined in this way. The person has to have earned at least $2,325 in the highest earning quarter of the first 4 of the 5 quarters that they've worked. That can be earned from one or more employers, and their employment status has to be one of these. They have to either be currently employed and working in the state, or they were employed and working in the past 12 weeks immediately preceding the time that they request for leave. This time, the paid leave benefits are also available for those who are sole proprietors or self-employed, using the same criteria of having earned the amount of time. Having earned the 2325. What happens when a person applies for benefits at the paid leave authority? Here's essentially a flow chart. What happens first is that the employee submits their application for leave to their employer, and they get that leave approved. If the employee has offered all of the appropriate documentation, the employer grants the leave, and they inform the employee of any available time off, short-term or long-term disability options that might be available to them to cover all or part of the time that they are away. If they don't have enough time to cover all of the time that they will be on leave, or in withholding the 2 weeks that they're entitled to hold on to, they don't have enough time, they may apply to the Pay Leave Authority for benefits. And once they do so, we at the authority validate in 2 parts: their eligibility for leave under the statute based on earnings, and that the reason that the leave is being sought is covered by the statute. We calculate the amount of the employee's benefit, but then we're also in contact with the employee and the employer to make sure that those absences are actually covered absences. And we also look to determine whether or not there are any other offsets that our employer provided for time off. For example, the person might be using part of their paid time off that's offered by their employer for part of their day, and they may have the other half paid by the paid leave authority. Once all of that is determined, then we issue the paid leave benefits. And what do those benefits look like? So it is a 2-part formula for those that earn less than or equal to the minimum wage multiplied by 40, and for those that earn more. So on the left side of the screen, for those that earn less than or equal to the minimum wage multiplied by 40, which right now is $480, they will receive 95% of their base weekly earnings. For those that earn more than that, they earn 95% of the base weekly earnings, plus 60% of the amount that exceeds that multiplied by 40. And the cap, regardless of either circumstance, is 60 times the Connecticut minimum wage, which would be at this point $12 an hour, so $720. So how does this work in practice? Some examples. Here is an example of Mike, who earns less than or equal to the minimum wage multiplied by 40, which remember is $480. Mike makes $375 a week. When we apply the formula of the 95%, Mike ends up getting a maximum weekly benefit of his maximum weekly benefit would be $456, but he gets 95% of his pay for leave, so he gets $375 a week. Deborah makes a bit more, almost twice as much as Mike. She makes $700 a week. So we start with part 1 of the formula, which is the $480. That's the 40 times 12. Then we take 60% of the excess over her weekly pay, which you can see here is $220. So we add together the 480 and the 132, which is 60% of the 220, and her weekly benefit is $612 a week. What's the role of the employer in all of this? Here's what we ask: that every time an employee asks for time off for a potentially FMLA qualifying event, we ask the employer to ask 2 questions: whether the employee is eligible for job protected leave, either under the paid leave law or other statutes, and whether the employee is eligible for any income replacement while they are on leave. We feel it's important that both questions are addressed each time so that there can be a comprehensive approach to paid leave. We know that employees can be eligible for federal only, state only, both running concurrently, neither, but perhaps under, for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act as a reasonable accommodation, or they may not have any job protected leave at all. We know that, just as a review, that if they're eligible for federal leave or state leave, that the criteria for those are those that we've already reviewed. But here's another reminder that we also want to think about whether they may be eligible for the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Connecticut Fair Employment Practices Act, or the Pregnancy Disability Act. So once we make that determination, we know that paid leave benefits from the authority and employer-provided benefits can be paid at the same time, with the caveat that the total amount received by the employee cannot exceed 100% of their wages. In some instances, short-term and long-term disability policies require that employees exhaust their state benefits first before they access those policies. So they may come to the authority first. An important part of the statute that you should know about is that workers' compensation benefits, if received by an employee, deems them ineligible for benefits from the paid leave authority. Finally, employers may require employees to use their sick leave accruals, their vacation accruals, or other kinds of PTO, but they are entitled to keep up to 2 weeks of their leave. So let me just explain this a bit. Some employers use buckets of time, sick leave, personal, vacation, and the like. You can require your employee to exhaust all of their sick time, and you can ask them to use their vacation time, but they're entitled to keep up to 2 weeks of it. If you use PTO, then they are entitled to keep 2 weeks of their PTO, and I'll have some examples of that. What's the employer's role in income replacement? I think we reviewed this when we went through the workflow earlier, but they notify the employee whether they qualify. They let them know whether or not they can use some or all of their time. We're not asking employers to change their policies with the exception of the retention of those 2 weeks. They tell the employee that they may apply for paid leave benefits from the authority, and it's the authority that determines whether the employee qualifies for the paid leave benefits. It's important to know here that you may have an employee who may be eligible to receive benefits from the authority, even if they are not eligible for job protected leave. And here would be a circumstance that would occur. The statute says that a person is eligible for paid leave benefits if they've earned that 23.25 in that highest quarter of the past 4 of the 5, and they've worked for an employer for 12 weeks immediately prior to the time that they're applying for leave, or they're currently working. Those are essentially the criteria for paid leave benefits. If a person is new to you and have not worked for you as an employer for 3 months, they may still be eligible to receive paid leave benefits. So let's say they come to you in month 1 and say, I now have to have surgery and it's rather urgent and I need the time off. They don't have job protection, but they are entitled to take the leave and they're entitled to get paid for it from the paid leave authority. But it's important for that employee to come to you and let you know that that's happening, and for you to make a determination as an employer as to whether or not you will hold the job open or how you'll handle their absence while they're away because they don't have job protection. If the employer has opted to provide a private plan, then it's the employer who will determine whether the employee is eligible for leave and for benefits under that plan. Here are some examples that put what I just described into practice. So there's a large employer, Acme. They have 100 employees, and Wiley Coyote is a full-time employee who's worked there for 10 years. He has 4 weeks of sick and 2 weeks of vacation time. He's injured his hand in an off-duty, non-work-related fireworks accident, and now he needs to be out of work for 8 weeks. And now we apply that 2-part analysis. Is he eligible for job protected leave? If so, under what statutes? And also, is he eligible for any income replacement? And if so, from whom and when will they start? His timeline looks like this. Because he's worked for 10 years, we know that he's eligible now for both the Connecticut FMLA in 2022, because he's worked more than 3 months, and the federal, because he's worked for 10 years, so he's well qualified for that. So those, in this case, will run concurrently for him. He has some sick leave accruals, and as the employer, you can compel him to use all of that, but he now has decided, along with his employer, that he'll hold on to his vacation, and he's entitled to do that. So to cover the wages for the remaining time that he is away, he will come to the paid leave authority and apply for paid leave benefits. But then here we have Jamie, who works for a much smaller employer, and she's a part-time employee. She will also be able to apply for benefits. She only has 6 days of sick leave and 3 weeks of vacation time, and she's injured herself running with her dog. So now we'll look to see if she has job protected leave and if she has income replacement that's available to her. So that she has job protected leave under the Connecticut FMLA, but not under federal. because she's not worked long enough, and she has not, but in this instance, it's because she hasn't worked enough hours. She's not met the 1,250-hour requirement for the federal. Sorry, the 1,000-hour requirement for the federal. So, but she does have all of her sick leave accruals and some of her vacation. She's using all of her sick leave and a portion of her vacation. And then she will come to the Paid Leave Authority for her wage replacement benefits for the remainder of the time that she will be out. For those employers that have spouses that work for the same employer, under the federal and state law, we now know that spouses are required to share their 12-week job protected leave if it's for the reasons that we see here: bonding with a child that is new to their family through birth, adoption, or foster care, or to care for a parent with a serious health condition, or under state law, a family member with a serious health condition. Under the new leave law in 2022, the spouses will not be required to share their 12-week paid leave benefit. So a bit about private plans, which you've heard me allude to earlier. Employers may offer a private plan as an option to the public plan. There is no opt-out of the paid leave law, with the exception of the employers that I noted earlier. If an employer offers a private plan, it has to meet these criteria. It must offer the same or better benefits as the public plan, and it cannot cost the employees more than the public plan, and that now is limited to 0.5%. Also noted here, what is not noted here, I should say, is that if the Paid Leave Authority lowers the contribution rate on the public plan, then the private plan must also do so. The employer must demonstrate that it has the ability to administer claims and benefits, and statutorily, it must hold a vote to seek the employee's approval of the private plan option. And that vote has to be the majority vote of all of the eligible employees who work in the state. And finally, the Paid Leave Authority has to approve the plan. For employers who are interested in offering a private plan, this is how the process will work. We ask employers to go in and register and just indicate their interest in applying for a private plan. Soon we will inform you that you can come back and complete your application so we can gather more information from you. And then finally, you'll come back and upload your plan documents, which will include your proof of insurance for the private plan, something that we called a plain language guide, which is a summary of the statute that we provided for you from the Paid Leave Authority and is available through the insurer. And third, the proof of your majority vote. And once you've uploaded those documents, we will review your application and notify you of our approval decision. If your plan is approved, that approval is good for 3 years, but there will be a periodic review to determine whether there have been any substantial changes to the plan that might require an additional vote. I've said a lot today, but there are a lot of resources that are available at our website, ctpaidleave.org. Some of those include these that I have outlined here. To communicate with your employees, there are 4 types of documents available. One is an extensive employee rights poster that lists all of the reasons, the withholding of the 0.5%, and when benefits will be available. A smaller, more compact version of this information is available in what we call the employee rack card. Far to the right, you will see that there's an employee fact sheet, which also gathers all of the information on one page, front and back, regarding paid leave. And finally, the most downloaded document on our website is this paycheck mailer, which you can download and email to your employees to provide notice that their paychecks will change starting in January. But for you as employers or for your clients, we have a comprehensive employer toolkit that can be found on the site that includes all of these documents and everything that I've spoken of, including information around private plans, reasons for leave. It's all in one place for you in the employer toolkit. So the call to action for employers looks like this. We're asking all employers to register by December 31st, because that's the date that we just need to know how many employers are well aware of their obligation to withhold by January. If you use a payroll provider, please contact them to be sure that they're prepared. I will say that we've been working with all of the major payroll providers since April. They should all know, they should be prepared, but we don't want you taken by surprise either. Please educate your employees about the withholding using the resources that I outlined above and going to the employer resource page at ctpaidleave.org. And finally, visit the website regularly for any updates that we might provide there. We're here to help you. The best way we can do that is for you to go to the site and use the Contact Us portal, because we do not yet have a call center stood up. And it may take us some time to do that. There are also helpful resources on the site through frequently asked questions and videos, and the site is available in English and Spanish, as are all of the documents on the site as well. So thank you for the time today, and we can open up the session for questions. All right. You're on mute.
And
There
I'm
you go.
muted.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us, Andrea. That was a
Welcome.
lot of information,
It
but I
was.
know helpful for our member employers who,
Good.
joined us this morning.
Good.
For those of you still on the line, Amber has dropped some helpful links into the chat, covering some of the information that Andrea was sharing with us just a moment ago. So pop in there and be on the lookout for that. I've got a couple of questions, and by a couple, I mean a handful in
Yep.
the Q&A. So let's see if we can get some of those addressed. So as far as the administration of the program, Andrea, has the state hired additional employees to facilitate the new program to work on claims administration within your department?
Mm-hmm. So we're a quasi-governmental agency, which is just sort of a different entity than, let's say, the Department of Revenue Services or the Department of Labor, which is a sort of a fully standing state agency. We're brand new, just started in March. With that said, our board just decided that claims administration will happen with a partnership with a third-party administrator that has extensive experience in leave management. We think that at this point in time, given where we are in our environment with COVID, that we really want to make sure that we partner with, with a company that understands leave management well. We've done an extensive amount of research, and there will be a request for proposal that will be issued in January so that we can make sure we get the right partner to do that work.
Awesome. Great. So a couple of questions that came up in the Q&A on eligibility for leave for employees who work for a Connecticut employer but may actually live in another state but travel into Connecticut for work. So can you kind of answer the eligibility question? Is it just for folks who work and live in Connecticut, or some of these other people that might be traveling in or based in Connecticut with their employer but live elsewhere?
Right. So eligibility with respect to employees does not have a residency requirement. So for employees that live elsewhere, and we have many people that live in Rhode Island, right, and Massachusetts. I know a few folks that even commute from New York periodically to come work in the state. All of those people are eligible to participate in the program. So actually, their employer is required to withhold the 0.5% and remit that to the paid leave authority. But those employees are also eligible to apply for benefits.
Okay. And so that would extend to employees who, in our new remote world might be living based in Idaho, but have a Connecticut employer.
Well, no, so that's a bit of a different scenario.
Okay.
The scenario that I'm thinking of and I'm referencing are individuals who would normally come into the state to work.
Got
Or
it.
for whom, this might make it a bit clearer, or for whom you as an employer have a payroll tax obligation or an unemployment insurance obligation. So, that, and if when you issue the W-2, do you do that on through this representing wages that are paid through the state of Connecticut? Let me put it that way. So using sort of those as baselines and points of information, if you do those things and you treat that person as if they're a Connecticut employee, then they have a withholding obligation, but they also have an opportunity to apply for benefits too.
Got it. Wonderful.
Okay.
I know there were a couple of questions. We're all, that remote world that we're living in.
I know.
Some wrenches.
It's difficult, but the Department of Labor, our Connecticut Department of Labor, has not yet changed the rules around people who would normally commute into work to Connecticut, but who are working from home because of the environment in which we're in. So they still consider them Connecticut employees, and so do we.
Okay. And how about the opposite? Connecticut employees who are living in Connecticut but come into the state of Massachusetts, for example, for work.
Right. So they are not considered Connecticut employees of that employer. So they would not be participating in the program, but I know that Massachusetts has its own paid leave program, so
Right.
they're probably there. And then there are folks who, who work part of the time in Massachusetts and part of the time in Connecticut, and they're contributing to both. And I do feel for them because we hear from them.
Wonderful. Let's see here. I'm going to pop back up to the beginning of my list and go down. So for folks that are going to be pursuing or considering the private plan option, I know you addressed on the slide where you talked about private plans that the private plan can't cost more than the 0.5% that the employee would contribute to participate in the state plan.
That's right.
But I would assume, and you can correct me if my assumption is wrong, that the employer could pick up the cost for the private plan for the employee without doing deductions. Is that
They
correct?
could. For the private plan, that's an option. It's not an option for the public plan because
Okay.
that is supposed to be employee funded. We've had some employers ask that question, and if they wanted to do that for the public plan, they would have to gross up the wages
Okay.
because they want to hold their employees harmless, but we know that that might have tax implications to employees, so we're not encouraging employers to do that.
Sure. I have another question on the tax piece. And the question was, I know I saw it in the Q&A, and now I'm struggling to find it, but pre or post tax for the deductions?
Post FICA, it's based on the FICA number.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
And is there a cap on the employee contributions that they'll be making?
There's a salary cap, and that's the Social Security contribution rate. So that right now it's $142,800. So any wages earned above that are not subject to withholding.
Okay, wonderful. Are there types of wages that are excluded from the withholding requirements? So bonuses, for example, what gets included in the employee's wages?
It's a very expansive definition of wages. So it does include bonuses and tips and commissions. So all of those are included in the
Okay,
definition of wages.
wonderful. I had a couple of questions about federal contractors. So we have a question from one of our members who is not a federal employer, but they are a federal contractor, and they're wanting
Mhm.
to know if they are a covered entity for purposes of doing the deductions and participating in the program.
That's a great question, which in the 70 webinars we've done, we've never gotten before. This is why I love doing them because we always learn something new. So the answer is yes, because you're actually not a federal government entity. So what I'm understanding the question to mean is that you have a contract with the federal government, but you're a Connecticut employer.
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
then you would in fact be subject to the withholding and the remittance of the contribution.
Sure.
Yeah.
If the employer has, so you talked a little bit about how the leave benefits coming from the authority would work with an employer provided benefit like a
Mhm.
PTO,
Mhm.
like a short-term disability. So I have a question in the chat box here about whether or not the authority or a short-term disability plan would pay primary if they're coming in and covering the same claim.
Right. And so that depends on the plan. And that's why in one of the slides, I had that workflow so that we're talking to the employer because we found that some employers want to actually have the plan kick in right away. I'm not sure why. I guess that depends on how their benefits are structured. Some want their employees to come to the paid leave authority first and exhaust those benefits and then come. So I can't give a direct answer unless I really know how that specific plan works, which is why we'll be talking to employers to figure out what that person has available to them
Okay.
specifically with respect to short-term disability, so we can make sure there's coordination
Of benefits there.
of benefits. Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Another question in here about the fund itself. And so, I think the assumption based on this question is that, there will be quite a few employees who take advantage of a program like this,
Yeah.
being offered in the state. And so, are there protections in place um, for the fund and the contribution to ensure that the fund stays solvent? What are the
Mhm.
protections for employees, say, to make sure that additional payroll taxes aren't increasing beyond the percentage that they're at now.
So there are two, one of which is that I did have an updated actuarial analysis done for our current environment, just really needing to know if for any reason, and none of us wants this, things don't get any better, right? We still have the same rates of unemployment, and we still have the stagnation in our economy that we're experiencing across the country. What will happen? So those analyses tell us that the fund will remain solvent. We'll probably have a lower rate of reserves than we would like to have, but there will be enough to pay claims. And it also anticipates a significant increase in claims because
Mhm.
of COVID-related illnesses. The second is that the statute itself allows the paid leave authority to adjust the amount of benefits that are paid outside of that formula if we need to do so in order for the fund to remain solvent. So let's say we had a lot of folks that were at that 95%. If we needed to lower it to 80 or 75 or whatever the number might be, so that there's enough money for everyone to receive benefits, then
Mhm.
then we have the authority to do that under the statute.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay.
Couple of questions about registration.
Mhm.
So if the organization is registered already for Connecticut withholdings through DRS, do they need to set up a new registration? Is registration with the paid authority different? What do they need to do in order to get registered and ready for January 1st?
It is different, and I know how frustrating this is, and it's partly because we're brand new, and partly because it has the Department of Revenue Services was well ahead of us in their systems that they created, so we weren't able to create the kind of partnership that we would have liked that would have made those registrations parallel or even compatible. So we apologize in advance for that, but we did think about it. We didn't try to create something new. We didn't think about it, and we tried, but it wasn't possible. So it is a different registration process for us. We're going to first send you to business.ct.gov, which is it's a new system that is designed to avoid this very process where people have to go to different places, but it's very new. So you'll start there, and then we'll bring you into ours. So because we feel bad about this, one of the things that we did is we tried to make registration really easy. So it's a 5-step process. It shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes to do. There's a video that teaches you how to do it. And there's a checklist that you can download beforehand so that and this is my own pet peeve. You get in the middle of the thing, and then they tell you, oh, you need your kid's birth certificate, you need to get your passport, you need your social, and you're like, why didn't you tell me this before I sat down? Right? You got to go get all this stuff and you got to stop in the middle. We didn't want any of that experience. So there's a checklist, you download it, you make sure you get all your stuff, you watch the video, and then you go register. And then it should work beautifully. I think as of this morning, we had 11,000 registrants, so we know it's working.
Sure.
And then there's help if it doesn't. But yeah, it should be
Wonderful.
okay. We're sorry we couldn't make it all work in the same place, but we tried.
So another question on paid leave benefits and how that works with the employer's provided benefits. And then I had a couple of questions in here about the job protection. So let me see if I can kind of distill those. If the employee doesn't have paid benefits available to them through their employer because they've exhausted paid leave benefits, they don't have anything left in their various buckets, is there a waiting period before they'll receive payment from the fund and the authority? Prior to getting some kind of continuation between what they've had and what they're going to be getting?
No, so the statute does not have any provisions for waiting periods. So if the person meets the eligibility standards, meaning they've earned that $2,325 and they within the time period that's stated in the statute, and they're either currently employed or they've been employed 12 weeks immediately preceding the time that they apply for leave, then they're eligible for
Okay.
the benefit. If they've exhausted and they have to have a reason for leave, and they have to have not exhausted all of their leave. So those are all the things we'll be checking for.
Mm-hmm. So another question kind of along those lines, if the employee has sick time, and I think you answered this when you talked a little bit about holding 2 weeks of leave time for them.
Mhm.
But had a question in the chat whether or not the employer should require employees to use sick time before they go to the authority to apply. With vacation time, can they require them to use vacation time prior to going to the authority to apply? So can you share just a little bit more detail about
Mhm.
that?
Yeah. So an employer can require an employee to use their sick accruals and their vacation time, withholding that 2 week time for them for to cover all or part of the time that they'll be away. So they can require them to do that before they come to the paid leave authority. But let me just be really clear that an employee's right to come to the paid leave authority is not a decision that an employer can make. So an
Hmm.
employer can say, we want you to use, let's say they have 3 weeks of sick leave and 5 weeks of vacation. If you want to get paid for the time that you're out, you have to use your 3 weeks of sick leave to do that. But your employee may say to you, I don't really want to do that. I'd rather go to the paid leave authority and kind of save up my sick time. And that's the piece that we're not encouraging employees to do. And that's why we're talking to the employer and say, what exactly do they have available? Do they
Hmm.
have those 3 weeks? And do they have more vacation time? And we will most likely tell the employee, you need to go use your 3 weeks of your sick time and then come back to us when you've
Hmm.
exhausted that, because it's not intended for you to use it as a way to save up your sick time. You come to us when you have no other alternative for paid leave. That's the point.
Hmm.
So some states have been struggling with this a little bit because employees feel like I've contributed to it and I should be able to access it. And was well, but you're not the only one that's contributed to it. There's a whole lot of other people. It's a pool. So it's not like Social Security. It's not like it's your money. It's not a healthcare savings account. It's not your specific money. So it's managing those expectations that I think is really going to be the issue. So we're going to be encouraging employees to do that first.
Hmm. That's really helpful, I think, for a lot of our members on the line to hear that,
Mhm.
when that coordination happens between what they're communicating to employees about their internal policies and the benefits that are available through the state, that
Yeah.
there's going to be a little bit more of an encouragement to go through the employer first, as a
Mhm.
way to ensure that we don't have people out on, Connecticut paid leave for a period of time and then come back and take 5-week vacation. I know that's always a concern
That
that,
is, it
employers
is.
have when we move into kind of these paid leave worlds.
Right. It's what we commonly call stacking, which we
Yes.
don't want to see happen either. Right. The idea is that we don't want people out for like half the year, right, between vacation and sick leave, because you're supposed to be working. That's kind of the point. So we're just trying to make that work. Yeah, I understand.
Thank you for that. Unionized workforces, so not
Mhm.
union employees of the state, but unionized workforces within a private employers organization. Are they covered
Mhm.
under the plan?
They are covered, and so some private employers have said to us that their private bargaining units are refusing to cooperate because they feel they have to bargain for it. This statute does not allow for that. They are considered employees just like those that are not in the bargaining unit. Everyone participates. The only voting for inclusion is whether you as an employer offer a private plan. Then
Sure.
that right, it's right. Then that unit can decide whether it's public or private. But otherwise, everybody's in.
Got it. Okay. Can employees opt out of doing the deductions from their pay? Say, I don't want to participate?
They may not, and they will probably have a significant amount of protestation, but there is no opt out.
No opt out. Okay.
No.
So a couple of questions I think that might need a little bit of clarity around the coordination between the Connecticut FMLA and the Connecticut paid leave. My understanding has been that the employer is still the one that's going to be responsible for managing the job protected leave portion of it.
Mhm.
So, getting the information from the employee to prove their absence, tracking their time, et cetera, and that the authority is on the side of providing the pay benefits, right,
That's
for the
correct.
time that the employee is on leave.
That's correct.
Um, so a couple of questions around the switch from 12 weeks or excuse me, 16 weeks over a 2-year period, 12 weeks over a 12-month period.
Mhm.
So can you explain just a little bit more about that change and what an employer should be mindful of as they're making that switch?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that employers are going to have is running state FMLA and federal FMLA concurrently, because now they will be in 2022 so different from one another. We have had some employers make changes to their policies so that running of the concurrence is a bit easier, but it's still very difficult, and they haven't really given us a window into what that change looks like. I think they're talking to their own benefits coordinators and trying to figure that out.
Mhm.
That that the 12 weeks in a 12-month period is statutory. And that's how the statute has been defined. And so there isn't really much that I or anybody at the authority can really do about that. It's just the way that it is now. But we're very cognizant of the fact that it does pose a significant challenge with running it concurrently with federally, especially since there's no hours worked requirement, right? And there's no in the amount of time that well, put it a different way, there's no hours worked requirement, and you don't have to work for a year anymore.
Mhm.
So yeah, so
Mhm.
it's very different. I realize that.
For the registration for employers, can
Mm,
they register now for participation in the state program, but apply for an exemption at a later date? Are there timelines for that?
mhm.
Um, Explain a little bit more about that process.
Yes. So we have a number of employers that aren't really sure whether they're going to participate in the public plan, or they need some time to figure out if they're going to apply for a private plan. You can go in right now. We are strongly encouraging you to do this, to go in right now and register. And if you even remotely think that you're going to participate in a private plan, just indicate it. You're not making a commitment to a private plan when you check that box that says I'm thinking about it. We just want to know. But what's really critical is no matter what you decide, you need to withhold now. Because if you don't withhold and your employees vote to go into the public plan, then you as the employer are going to be on the hook for all of those contributions.
Mhm.
So withhold it, hold on to it somewhere. And then after that, you can make your own decision about which direction you're going to go in. But don't find yourself in a financial circumstance where you're on the hook for all those contributions, because you can't, by law, you can't go back to your employees under labor law and collect that money.
Sure, sure. For another question on leave administration, in our last couple of minutes. So for intermittent leaves, I know this
Hmm.
is always something on employers' mind, the fun
Everybody's favorite.
intermittent.
Yep.
I bet you've got this one before.
Yep.
So if an employee is approved for an intermittent leave, what does the employee need to do in terms of notifying the employer? I'm out on Wednesday. You're going to verify with the employer, then they get the funds from the authority. How does that
Mhm.
process work with respect to intermittent leaves?
Yeah, so intermittent leave will be managed the way that it's managed now for employers, those larger employers, those are, the 50 to 75 threshold, they know how they're managing intermittent leave. And I know it's not their favorite. I used to do it as a CEO of a large company, and I didn't like it either because it's tough to manage. What we're saying at the Pay Leave Authority is that we will be paying for intermittent leave in one lump sum. It will probably be the accumulation of a 40-hour week, of the
Okay.
equivalent of 40 hours, because that's honestly how most states are doing it, because it is administratively incredibly expensive and almost impossible to pay intermittent leave in the instances in which it's actually taken. So we will probably settle that with the Department of Labor within the next month or so, and we'll
Okay.
have more guidance around that. But that's our intent at this moment. The other question people usually ask us around intermittent leave and other kinds of leave is what kind of counting year we're using. We, meaning my general counsel and I, both of whom have done employment law for a long time, are big believers in the rolling year. So we will
Okay.
not be using a calendar year at all. And we like rolling back. That's our favorite. So if that's what you're using, then you're in luck. If you're not, we're not asking you to change it, but that's what we're using to count it so that everybody knows that.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay.
For documentation on substantiating my need for leave, medical certifications, those types of things, will I submit those as an employee through my employer that then communicates to the paid leave authority? Does the employee submit them directly to the authority in
Mhm.
terms of that coordination that happens right at the beginning of somebody's approval?
It's the employee's responsibility. So once they've received that grant of leave from their employer, it's the employee's responsibility to submit those documents to the paid leave authority. We are not putting that burden on employers.
Wonderful. For the 2 week save of time, um, is the employer allowed to save or required to save vacation time or sick leave time or both? If the employer has kind of separate buckets for each of those benefits?
Yep, if you have separate buckets, you can require the exhaustion of sick, but they must keep 2 weeks of vacation.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. Let's see here. And for those of you who are on the line who may not have had your questions answered yet, I know we've only got a couple more minutes with Andrea, and we so appreciate her time this morning. But anything that's here in the Q&A that I've not been able to address with her, we'll try and get those answers out to attendees after the program. So
Mhm.
don't be worried if you haven't heard us cover it yet. So here's a question about small employers
Mm,
and Connecticut paid leave, because this is a whole new world for some of those small
absolutely.
employers. So
Absolutely.
for a smaller employer who doesn't have enough employees for the Connecticut FMLA to kick in, what does eligibility look like for the Connecticut paid family leave? If they aren't a covered entity for the job protection, right? For
Hmm.
Connecticut
Hmm.
FMLA, how does that impact the benefits?
Okay, so I think I understand your question, but if you have one employee, you're covered under this new law,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
So I can't really think of a category of employer that wouldn't have at least one employee. So that all of the rules that I outlined around the saving of the 2 weeks of vacation, 3 months of job protection, the job protection after 3 months, those apply whether you've got one employee or you have 20,000. So the
Okay,
rules are the same. I will tell you that personally, the small employers are the focus for us in particular, because we know that this is an entirely new world. So we're starting next year. I'm hoping to launch it in February. There will be a series of webinars like these for the small employer, where we will teach you
wonderful.
what you need to know about family and medical leave, how it works, what you need to do, what forms you need to look at, because we know this is new. We don't expect you to figure it out yourself. So we're planning that series now, and there will be a small employer toolkit, like you see that toolkit that we have for the employer. There'll be one specifically for the small employer, and that's what we're working on as we speak.
Awesome. Does the authority have a process in place to identify areas where the employee might submit claims for benefits fraudulently,
Mhm.
or an investigative arm that's going to look at ensuring that employees aren't taking advantage of the program year over
Mhm.
year?
Yeah, we will, and that's part of what we're building with the claims administration piece. So it's not just paying benefits, it's looking for abnormal patterns in claims and benefits, looking for healthcare providers that always seem to show up with the same people. We know that, I have a friend that refers, she works for another state agency. She said, you know what, I can give you the list of all the Dr. Summer offs, as she calls them, the ones. So she's like, I know who they are, and I'll give you that list. And we said, thank you very much. So we do know that this is a problem, but it's a problem with every benefit
Sure.
that's offered. With workers' compensation, with Social Security, we've seen it with unemployment. But now that we know, we can get ahead of it and try to do the best that we can and learn from other states as well. But we will be very vigilant around fraud, because we don't want it either. We don't want that either.
Sure, sure. I love that, Dr. Summer off. I'm going to be
Yeah.
using that one in the future.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that was a good one. Would you share that with me? Yeah.
so one other quick question before we close out for this morning, and this is just on another administrative piece. So the employee notification about this change to their paycheck. that
Mhm.
I know the Paid Leave Authority has a sample notification that's available on the website. Is the notification required? How is the authority,
Mhm.
communicate or wishing that employers would communicate with employees about this change?
Yeah, so inexplicably, the statute does not require communication about this until mid 2022. I don't know why. I don't have an answer for why it reads that way. But obviously it's not a good idea to wait that long. It just really isn't. So we're telling employers, use the tools that we put on the website. Use that paycheck mailer, use the guide for employees, use the rack card, download it, email it to all your employees, print it, mail it, whatever you want to do. We know that employers are using it because we can track how many times it's downloaded.
Sure.
I mean, it's been done only thousands and thousands of times, and that's what we want to see. So don't make up the stuff yourself. We please don't do that. Use what we have, and it's designed to send directly to your employees as it's written.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Well, we're right at 9:30, a little bit over. So
sure.
thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know this has been a huge help, to our members and getting them prepared for thinking about what next year means for this program and thinking about, more importantly to them, what 2022 means for this program. So
Yeah.
we thank you so much for your time. For those of you attendees that are still on the line, like I said, we'll be taking a look at the Q&As, making sure that if we didn't cover your answer live, we'll be shooting those responses out to you with a copy of the slide deck that so many of you requested. But thanks so much for your time, Andrea, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, and happy holidays to everybody. We appreciate it.
All right, take care,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.